Here's President Trump. Listen.
Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I notice. Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, and millions more black Americans who made America what it is today. Big impact.
So we would have invited Frederick Douglass here, but he died in 1895. That wasn't completely clear from the president's comments, and he got some criticism for that. Does he sound like a kid who hasn't done his homework, Michael?
A kid?
Absolutely. I would think that as a professor at Georgetown University, and I wrote that in the New York Times, it seems to me that I have never seen a president so blatantly and unapologetically unmolested by enlightenment. Here's a man who was not in the least curious about the depth of facts, the sophisticated interpretation of those facts, or placing black history in a broader context that can then be used, I think, to illuminate what he's attempting to do. Look, if Donald Trump were to be serious about that black history, talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and Frederick Douglass, who said what to the Negroes the 4th of July, Martin Luther King Jr., who said that he was sorry to conclude that most Americans were unconscious racists, and Harriet Tubman, who constantly left her safety zone to go back to slavery, to free slaves. If he were to truly associate himself with those figures, he might have to be self-critical about his own particular administration. But the lack of involvement, the lack of curiosity, the lack of knowledge, and the lack of the ability to relate what happened in history to what's going on now bespeaks, I think, a gross ignorance about African-American culture, and doesn't bode well for Mr. Trump, President Trump, addressing these issues either through public policy or from using his bully pulpit to illuminate the context of the crises that black people confront.
The whole thing about Frederick Douglass also came up during the White House briefing. Here's Sean Spicer.
Today he made the comment about Frederick Douglass being recognized more and more. Do you have any idea what specifically he was referring to?
Well, contribution. I think he wants to highlight the contributions that he has made, and I think through a lot of the actions and statements that he's going to make, I think the contributions of Frederick Douglass will become more and more.
I'm not sure I understood. Seriously, I'm not sure I understand what he meant by that.
This is why we need Black History Month, Don. Look, Black History Month started as Negro History Week, and Carter G. Woodson started this. He pioneered this because he believed that basically black history needed to be taught as part of history in the schools, so that our kids understood history. And then as it grew, white progressives became more and more interested. And then we all know that under Gerald Ford, Black History Month was finally nationally recognized as a month. So we need Black history because the press secretary of the White House press secretary doesn't know Black history. The president of the United States does not know Black history.
Yeah, let Paris get in. Paris, go ahead.
Yeah, the only person who was actually in the room to know the totality of what was said, I will tell you what the president was referring to was the African American History Museum that is recently put on the mall, and he was talking about how important that is and visitors going to see that inside of the actual museum. He was talking about more and more people as they go through the museum are learning more and more about Frederick Douglass and the other persons that he named. But to say that this president, I'll just say this, have me on with the same panel in a few months when we see more and more things that this president is going to do for our community, especially HBCUs and education. I think you'll have a seriously different tune, because this is a president who cares about our community.
Look, Donald Trump doesn't have a plan for HBCUs.
We could welcome the attention of the Trump presidency on those critical and serious issues. That does not displace the fact or replace the fact that Donald Trump is not intimately familiar with these things. I'm glad that he's open to that kind of conversation. But as wielding a bully pulpit in the most visible spot in the world, to have that kind of fumbling toward an inchoate conception of what black history is, and speaking about Frederick Douglass as if he were in the present, as if he was some guy around the corner who was making contributions now without making that critical distinction, doesn't leave me much confidence in the fact that Donald Trump will be able to tell the past from the present. And indeed, given the tone and the tenor of his presidency, the revival of a certain kind of bigotry does harken back to the times that Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass lived.
Why do you say he's taking it out of context, Paris, when the tape was there? We actually ran it live on CNN.
Well, play the whole tape for your audience to see, and I think it'll speak for itself. I think you're taking out what he said out of context. He was
Look,
by no means talking as if Frederick Douglass is alive and well
today. He was.
Today.
I just heard the tape.
No.
Furthermore, I heard the comments in real time. I was watching in my office.
Well, Simone, congratulations. I was in the room, and I understand what he was saying.
And so there is a invited because Donald
well, that's a problem.
That's
your,
but here's the problem.
You should never. You should never turn down an opportunity to have a seat at the table.
Pardon me. I have a seat.
When you do not, you do not have a seat, Simone. You just said if you were given a seat, you would not go. That's the problem. That was the problem with Congressman Lewis when he said he would not invite President Donald Trump down to Selma. That's a problem. You want to have a seat at the table, and it's important to have a seat at the table.
Simone, start your comments over, please, because we didn't hear.
The problem is, look, I don't need Donald Trump to give me anything. I'm a 27-year-old black woman on CNN. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, Donald Trump needs to be talking about policies and proposals, real policy prescriptions for the African-American community. He's only given us rhetoric. He hasn't given us any action. And he cannot govern for the next 4 years like that. What we have seen from Donald Trump is that he has nominated people like Betsy DeVos, who is using charter schools as a carrot stick for black communities. We have seen that he has nominated people
like... The black community overwhelmingly supports charter schools.
We have seen that he has nominated people like Jeff Sessions, who doesn't even believe in protecting the civil liberties and civil rights of all people, including black people. So look, Donald Trump is disingenuous, and I'm going to take a page out of Kanye West's book. Donald Trump doesn't care about black people. And until he shows me otherwise, that's where I am.
Okay, so here's
That's unfortunate for you and for the listeners to hear that type of remark about the President of the United States, and for her to say that she would not have a seat at the table to try to bring about change.
I don't need Donald Trump to give me anything.
Donald Trump won't get you the President of the United States.
Do you know
and if President Obama invited me to a table, I would be there in a heartbeat, but he never asked me. But if he did, I'd be there because it's important.
Go ahead, Mike.
Brother Paris, here's the problem. Not only did Donald Trump not want to invite President Obama figuratively to a seat at the table, and I think that Solange has made this a very resonant metaphor, but what's interesting here is that this is a man who spent 2 years of his life weighing against the legitimacy and the stability of the American presidency in specifically denigrating and humiliating the reputation of President Obama, wanting to retroactively abort him from the womb of democracy and to pretend that he was not a human being worthy of significant attribution of intelligence, and you are offended simply because we push back on Donald Trump as a man who was manifestly incapable of intelligently speaking about the African-American experience.
If you had pushed,
Carson in the room, and God bless you, you in the room, I'm saying to you, I didn't interrupt you. Finally, the point is that Donald Trump is a man who represents the most antithetical to black intelligence position that one might stake out. And I think at this point, there is not much sympathy for a man who has been grossly inconsistent and viciously uncomprehending and indifferent to the plight and predicament of African-American people.
Well, Dr. Dyson, if you had pushed back on President Obama for the past 8 as you've done for this president in less than 2 weeks.
Read my book.
Maybe.
You clearly don't.
Maybe.
Dr. Dyson has been very critical of the Obama
Dr.
administration.
Dyson has been one of the most critical people of the Obama administration.
Maybe we would have gotten a lot more done for our community. Maybe the funding of HBCUs
One at a time, Doctor.
Maybe we would have been able to figure out this issue that's going on in the carnage in Chicago. Maybe we would have been able to do so. Oh, Lord, it's true.
Y'all do know black people live other places other than Chicago.
They do, but as of right now, the problem is in Chicago that we should focus on.
Here's
I'm
what's
glad
clear.
that the president is doing that.
There's an elective affinity between the black people who are attracted to Trump and Mr. Trump himself. The inability to read critically, to be in contact with the information that is readily available, and not to be able to be literate about the context and sophisticated, nuanced interpretations of the facts. The fact is, I wrote a book called The Black Presidency, Barack Obama and the Politics of Race in America, where I appreciated his genius, but I also pushed back upon the failures of that presidency to address significant and serious issues, including the issue of race within context. So if you are conversant with that literature, you would make the kind of ignorant statement you just made about the particular position I've stated.
And Dr. Dyson, I was watching you today as you were on The View with the ladies, barely getting a word in edgewise. That's a show, and that's why we love it. You talked about the reason you believe that this president was elected, and you also said that you believe that the former president did not do enough about race, while you appreciated his genius in some ways, what you call it, and I'm paraphrasing here. But also you talked about the reasons you think that Donald Trump will be bad for race as president.
Absolutely right. Because you see, Donald Trump, as I said then, and thank you, Don, for that, is that, Frankenstein is the name of the doctor, not the monster.